Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 9 of my 2022 reads. This week I read so many great books, lots and lots of things that I absolutely loved, and I had one DNF. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. The first book I finished is a poetry collection that I have been working on for multiple months, and that was The Wild Fox of Yemen by Threa Almontaser. I heard about this from Olivia Savannah at Olivia's Catastrophe, who I will link below, and this was one of her favorite poetry collections of last year. I had been really interested in it and I picked it up, but this is definitely a little bit above my reading level in terms of poetry. There's a lot of kind of imagery and abstractness to the way that the poems kind of play out that meant that I had to take my time with it. So I actually started it and realized I had to start over because I wasn't really getting it, read through some more, and I just kind of had to take my time, which I think makes sense. That's often how you need to read poetry that is more abstract. But I thought that this was just such a great poetry collection. It is something that is really focusing on themes of identity, which I always love, as well as has a very kind of feminist take and a lot of social commentary. So Threa Almontaser is Yemeni American, and a lot of these poems are talking about that identity, talking about also just what's happening in Yemen, talking about the way that like Islamophobia interacts with her family and her friends and her community, and also just talking about being a woman and talking about her feelings about how she's treated and all sorts of things. And a lot of it is really abstract and done through a lot of imagery and things like that. So it is quite beautiful poetry, a little over my head, but I thought it was wonderful and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Medallion Status by Hodgman, and I read this on audiobook. I listened together with my husband, Sush, and I had such a great time with this book. I really love Hodgman's work, and I'd actually borrowed this when it first came out a couple years ago, and then I just struggled to find time for audiobooks, but Sush suggested that we just kind of sit down and find time to listen together, even though he's actually already listened to this. We're both big fans of Hodgman, and it was just so wonderful. It was so good. I'd almost forgotten how much I love Hodgman's writing. I really loved his previous collection, Vacationland, as well. That was amazing, and this was just as good. He has some earlier work that is kind of pure humor, but Vacationland and Medallion Status are both sort of memoir with, you know, humor writing as well, but it is very personal. It's also very introspective and a lot of commentary on society and things like that. I really love it. This collection, Medallion Status, is a bunch of essays talking about power and fame and the seductiveness of those, of feeling like somehow you're special. And the book is structured around this idea of like a frequent flyer club. So when he was flying a lot, he got medallion status on the airline that he was flying, and that somehow made him feel so special, and he was so motivated to get enough miles to somehow keep that medallion status. And he uses that to frame this discussion about society and about our desire to somehow be powerful and special. And he relates that to his time kind of in Hollywood. So he's a writer and a comedian, and he had a little bit of fame where he was on TV, getting spots in movies, things like that. You might recognize him from, he was on The Daily Show for a while, and I think he's absolutely hilarious. But it was kind of a brief foray into fame. And so now he's not really famous anymore, and he just talks about the idea of fame. He also really talks about white male privilege and that assumption that, you know, you should be worthy of fame, you should be worthy of gold status, these sorts of things. I really liked the social commentary, and I liked the real insight into his own experiences, and just, I think he's hilarious, and I love his narration style. This was amazing. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would happily re-listen to this. Then I read Hither by Sebastian. This is a cozy romance slash murder mystery set in the 1950s in Great Britain. And I'd heard really great things about this from Rachel at Kalanadi as well as Joe at FinalBlowJoe, so I'll link them both below. And I thought, you know, I really want to get to this. So I picked it up and it was just as sweet and wonderful as they had said. This story follows a doctor who has kind of gone back to his hometown after the war, and he's got a lot of PTSD, and in fact he finds it really, really hard to even contemplate dealing with blood or surgery or anything like that after everything that he did in the war. And he's just trying to find solace in this kind of peaceful small little town, except that then there is a murder. And into the town comes sort of a secret agent who is investigating that because there might be some ties to some more nefarious things. And these two men sort of hit it off and they start flirting and something more develops. This has great mystery aspects to it as the story unfolds and we learn kind of what's going on. I thought that the way that the mystery unfolded was really well done in that I couldn't guess immediately what was happening, but also as you got the clues it made sense. So it wasn't like twisty turny, but it was nice the way that it unfolded. I really, really loved it. It has that cozy feel. And I also just loved the romance. It kind of felt very slow burn. And I really liked that the two men were very much dealing with their own kind of pains and internal issues and trying to work through that so that they could be together. It was just super sweet. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars and I can't wait to read the next one. Next, I read The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers by Jen Campbell. Jen Campbell is a YouTuber as well. I will link her below. She has a great channel, talks about all sorts of interesting things, has lots of cozy reading vlogs, etc. She's a big channel, you probably already know her. But she came out recently with a new middle grade fairy tale collection based on fairy tales from around the world that also has some really great illustrations that kind of embody the creepiness of a lot of these stories, and I really liked the way that the illustrations were woven throughout. There's full color ones, there are black and white ones, and there's also just really nice border illustrations on all of the pages. So I thought that this was great illustrations, but also great stories. I think there are 14 different stories from all sorts of different places in the world, and obviously these are Jen Campbell's own imaginings of these stories, so they're her interpretation, and she updates things. There's like one about a flying witch head that I particularly liked that I think she changed quite a bit from the original telling to be much more feminist, and I loved that ending to it. The stories in this were great. I was a little worried because it says like gruesome tales. I was worried that it was going to be like too gruesome, but it's really not. It's for middle grade, maybe even lower middle grade, and these are creepy stories, but they're just really wonderful fairy tales, which I absolutely love, and a bunch of these are based on things I've never ever heard before, so it was super, super cool. Definitely recommend this if you have any love of fairy tales. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I had really loved The Martian, and people said that this was very similar in style, and it really, really is. I would say that this is even almost just like the same type of main character, but a slightly different premise. So this story is also kind of a mystery. It's really interesting how it unfolds, where we have a man who wakes up aboard a spaceship and he doesn't have any memories. He doesn't know why he's there or what's going on or who he is or anything. And as the story unfolds, we see him in that timeline, but we also get his flashbacks of memory as they start coming back to him and what led up to him being on this spaceship. And it turns out that he has some things he's trying to get done that are quite difficult. I really liked the way that this story unfolded. I thought the mystery was great. The dual kind of timeline as it came together was really wonderful. And if you liked The Martian, you're really going to enjoy a lot of the way that this story happens, because he has to be very inventive in solving problems, because there's a lot of stuff that pops up and he has to be really creative. So it's got that kind of very hands-on engineering science-y feel, and it has a lot of the snarky humor and all that sort of stuff. plus it's got a lot of differences from the Martian in terms of what actually happens and what the goal is and what the bigger themes are. So I thought that this was such a fun ride. I do think that it was a little too similar to the Martian at certain times. Like it felt maybe like not a new enough story. And there were a couple of things that just broke my immersion because they weren't quite believable. But other than that, really enjoyable, fun read. It's kind of a slightly bigger book, maybe like 450 pages, but it was such a quick read. Really just enjoyable. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I had a buddy read, which was Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto, translated from Japanese by Megan Backus. And I buddy read this with Freddie at Sluggish Reader, who I will link below. I always love buddy reading with Freddie. He's just absolutely the best. And I really, really appreciated reading this together with him because he reads a lot more translated fiction and a lot more sort of literary fiction and things like that. And so this definitely had a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to discuss, and I loved discussing it with him. So this is actually a collection of 2 things. It's basically a novella, Kitchen, and then also a short story, Moonlight Shadow. Both of these have really, really similar themes, but they have slightly different kind of premises. So in Kitchen, we have a main character who's the perspective that is narrating from, a college girl who has lost her grandmother. Her grandmother passed away, and before that her grandfather had passed away, and before that her parents had passed away. And she's kind of in this depression. She just doesn't have the will to do anything. She can't really find joy in life. But she knows she has to move out of the apartment that they had been renting because it's too big for just her. And a classmate who's also at her college, who's kind of just an acquaintance, but actually was friends with her grandmother, offers to let her come and stay with him and his mom, who is a trans woman, until she kind of can feel like she's ready to rejoin life again. And so she does that, and it's about her grieving process, and it's about her finding joy in life, especially in the kitchen and cooking, and also about her connection with her kind of acquaintance, the boy, who's also grieving his own things, and how they can find companionship and how they can find meaning in life, even when grief feels so overwhelming sometimes. The other story, Moonlight Shadow, is also about a college-age girl who is grieving because her boyfriend was in a car crash and he died. And he was giving a ride home to his younger brother's girlfriend, who also passed away. And so now she's grieving, as well as her ex-boyfriend's younger brother is grieving, and they kind of are there as a support system for each other. She also takes up running as a way to kind of handle all of that grief, and comes across a mysterious woman on a bridge who kind of comes into her life in an interesting way. So this one as well is just talking about grief, about that feeling of how do you get over this? How do you find joy in life? How do you deal with that emotion of a feeling so heavy? And how do you deal with the knowledge that you're gonna have grief again? It's a thing in life. So I loved the themes in this. I thought that they were really, really great. I especially liked Moonlight Shadow, which I thought like really you could feel the grief of the characters. In Kitchen, both the main characters are kind of, it says, a little bit different, a little bit emotionally stunted, and very cold in the way that they handle their emotions. And it felt that while reading it, like it was kind of hard to emotionally connect to them. Whereas in Moonlight Shadow, I think it was a little bit easier. But I thought that this exploration of grief and how do you keep going even when you know that bad stuff is going to happen again. I thought that that was a really cool discussion. But other than that, I thought that Kitchen was not really that gripping to me. I just never really fully got engaged in it. And I also was not a huge fan of the way that transness was handled. There's definitely a lot of stuff in this that like content warnings for misgendering, for dead naming, and just kind of the way that transness is presented, where the trans character basically becomes a woman after losing her wife, and almost as a process of grieving, which is a kind of strange thing. So I'm not really comfortable with some of the ways that that was handled. Also in Moonlight Shadow, the younger brother of the boy who died, he starts wearing his girlfriend's schoolgirl uniform afterwards as a form of grieving. So there's like this weird connection with how grieving is handled and like gender and stuff. So I'm not really sure about that. I'm not obviously an expert or anything like that, but I felt a bit uncomfortable with it. The other thing was that Kitchen, not Moonlight Shadow, but Kitchen had a weird translation. It felt really, really clunky to me. Like it felt like sometimes reading a word for word translation of Japanese where I could almost imagine the sentence in Japanese. It just felt very clunky to me, and I struggled with just the writing style. So overall, it was okay, but I'm not 100% sure why this is like such a favorite, because I know this is something that I'd heard about for years and years and years. This was translated, I think, in the early 90s, and I know it's a huge favorite, but it was just okay to me. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I did DNF one book, which was Tidesong by Wendy Xu. This is a graphic novel, I think middle grade or YA fantasy book, and it is about a young girl who's 12 years old, who is basically a witch, and she is going to her great aunt to get trained so that she can prep for entrance into a magical school. It has a lot of like Kiki's Delivery Service type of vibes. It has a really cool setting. The magic involves these dragons and the ocean and water and wind magic. So lots of really cool things. I thought that the art style was also absolutely adorable. Just really, really cute. Loved the art style. But I was not really a fan of the characters. I really struggled with the main character, who is very, very headstrong, but in a way where she kind of disregards everything that anybody else tells her. She's supposed to be going to get trained, and she just gets so frustrated with why they won't let her just do magic while they're trying to actually train her. And even though she's doing things that are kind of reckless and could hurt other people, she has a lot of anger and a lot of angst, just a lot of angst, a lot of negative self-talk. And that negative self-talk especially, it just got to me. And after 30%, I said, you know what? I think maybe this is just not for me. I was getting really, really annoyed, just kind of hands in the air, thrown up based on this character, because it was just like she needed to calm down. So really great art style, love the magic, all that sort of stuff, but I think maybe the characters are just not gonna work for me, so it ended up being a DNF. Okay, so that's everything that I read this week. I had quite a big reading week. If you guys haven't read any of these, if you have any thoughts, if you want to read any of these, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.